All right. We are rolling live from Young Israel Scarsdale. It's Tuesday morning, July 12th. And we are learning Siman Reish and Gimel, Sif Beis. We're getting to we're now transitioning from discussing Shehiyah, the way in which we heat food up or you keep it warm or heat food up, whatever you want to describe it. The food preparation, we'll put it this way, from Friday afternoon into Shabbat, into Friday nights. And we talked about how you do that properly and how you can do that improperly. The Ashkenazi halacha is much more expansive and much more lenient in this regard, which I think makes life a lot more simple when it comes to food on Friday night. However, as I've alluded to for a number of weeks now, Chazara is a little more complicated and the restrictions are much more, well, let's put it this way, there's less room for leniency as opposed to what we just learned. So let's read, you'll take it from the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. This is an interesting moment because we will see here that the Ramah has much more to say than the Shulchan Aruch. Usually the Shulchan Aruch is the one who's doing most of the speaking, and the Ramah just kind of chimes in with a word here, a sentence here, a second opinion. Here the Ramah is going to go on at great length to discuss this topic much more than the Shulchan Aruch is going to talk about it. But that's not because the Rav Yosef Karo didn't write a lot about this. He wrote, much ink was spilled in the Beis Yosef before he got to the Shulchan Aruch, and he boiled it down to basically one sentence. If it were not for the Ramah, this would be very quick. But the Ramah's comments will take probably a couple of weeks to get through. So Sif Beis begins. And good morning. I see Steve Keller now has joined us, and Tommy Krause has joined us. Hello. Kira Shehi Grufa Uktuma. You have a kira, again, this ancient oven that had almost like a box, and there's an inside, and then there are two holes at the top where the heat is coming out of it, and you could put pots right on top of these of the holes at the top of this oven. And let's say this kira is grufa uktuma. It has, again, to reminding us of the terms, grufa means the coals were raked. Two opinions about what that means. Raked completely out of the from underneath the oven, though, as I'll mention in a second, that's a harder sell in this situation. Or you're raking it to the side of the oven, thus making it harder to stoke the coals, because when you stick that poker in there, whatever, the stick in there, to move it around, you realize, oh wait, everything's over in the corner, and it's a little bit more complicated, and you'll remember it's Shabbos, and I'm not supposed to play with the coals. The reason that I say that it's hard to believe that grufa here means raking it out is because if you raked it out before Shabbos started, and now we're talking about Shabbos morning, it's hard for me to believe that the heat has not dissipated entirely. Maybe there's something I'm just not fully understanding. Maybe you raked some of the coals, not all the, though I don't know how that's. I'm still a little bit fuzzy on that opinion of grufa, of how you rake the coals completely out. And now we're talking about chazara on Shabbos morning. I'm not so sure that fully makes sense. Though you could even just say that chazara in this context that we're going to talk about, you could even talk about doing this on Friday nights. So we'll learn, and you'll think about that point. But that's grufa. Tuma, again, is covering the coals with ashes. Again, more symbolic. It doesn't mean that puts out the heat completely, but this is your reminder again that it is Shabbos and we're not to play with the coals. V'natal hakdeira me'aleha. So you have this kira, and you take the pot that was on top of the kira, and you remove it. Afilu b'Shabbos muter lahachzira. Even on Shabbos, it is permissible to return this pot back to the spot it was on top of the kira. Again, it was on there before. I take it off at Shabbos. Let's even go with the simpler case of Friday night. It's Friday night. I take it off. We dish out some food to different people at the table, and then we put it back on the heat source. right on top of the kira. This is okay. Muter lahachzira kolzman jirotachas. Now come to what is called in halachic terminology the t'nai chazara, the conditions under which that must be met in order for chazara, which means the return of a pot to the fire. These are the conditions that must be met. Number one is kolzman jirotachas, as long as all for the whole time it must be rotachas. Now the word rotachas means boiling, so it must be still very hot. It can't be that you pulled it off for 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and suddenly now it's really, it's cold. It's cooled down. It's room temperature, and now you want to put it back on. The Shulchan Aruch does not believe that is a permissible action, and it would be a violation of laws of Chazara to put on the fire this pot that has completely cooled down. Now they're going to say, well, why? It's all a little bit random. Then we say it's all been cooked, right? If it's all been cooked, so we have the principle that we always can refer back to, which is ein bishul achar bishul. There is no cooking once it's been cooked. So why does it matter that it's cooled down, So let's read a little bit here. Again, we've only seen one Tanai Chazara. Let's just first start off and read the Mishnah Berurah to this point. So we'll back up for a moment, then we'll come back to the point about boiling. Nun beis, shehi grufa uktuma, afilu einu garuf v'katum, asur, afilu mitztamik v'ralo. Mishnah Berurah says that even if you don't rake the coals or cover them with ashes, it is prohibited, even if it's mitztamik v'ralo, even if the continuation of the heating of this food which is fully cooked, is not good for it. We talk about mitztamik v'ralo. That's like one of the more easy categories to when it comes to shehiyah to allow. Again, we're at Nun Beis in the Mishnah Berurah. You found it there?
No, I'm just puzzled about something else.
V'chein b'tanur afilu garuf v'katum. And even in an oven, remember, do not think of the word tanur in the modern sense. This is the ancient tanur. That was the one which had the wide bottom, narrow top, one hole at the top, again, which would allow the heat to be more concentrated on that one spot where the pot is sitting on top of it. So even if that is garuf v'katum, you cannot do chazara on top of a tanur, and certainly inside the tanur. But again, even with a kira, if it's not garuf v'katum, the conversation of chazara is over. There's nothing to the game over. When it comes to shehiyah, we said it's not necessarily game over. According to the psak halacha that we follow, if it's kamachal ben drusai, if it's cooked minimally to the point where it's nechal al hidei adchak, you could eat it. If you really are in a desperate situation, then you don't need garuf v'katum. Garuf v'katum really only helped us when in between raw and a third or a half cooked in shehiyah. But when it comes to returning food to the fire on Shabbos, garuf v'katum is a necessary factor to even start the discussion. Okay, there's no discussion without this. All right.
And it doesn't matter if it's liquid or solid.
It could even be a liquid that goes back here. Really? Yes, this is why it's going to be very confusing for a little bit. Yeah. So Hinda is just pointing out, wait, liquid, solid, what's going on here? So you probably come to know and love the procedure we follow is generally we don't heat up liquids on Shabbos. Here we're talking about something that is hot. So imagine you have a soup that is on Friday night. You have a soup that's on a heat source that is properly prepared. You did shehiyah properly. Now you want to serve everybody the soup, but you then want to put it back on, keep it hot. Maybe you want a second bowl, a third bowl. I don't know. You come up with other food. It could even be clear, all liquid, a soup. This would be permissible if the following conditions were met.
You can take the pot out of the oven or out of the heat source?
Out of the heat source, and then return it to the heat source. As long as these conditions are met. On Saturday morning, it's just not practical because the soup probably, or maybe it could actually, by the way, probably no issue with it. If the soup was sitting on a heat source the whole Shabbos, Friday night, on very low heat, and then you wanted to serve soup for Shabbos day, you could do that. It's not a crazy thing. You have to meet the following conditions, and you have to be willing to stomach the idea of leaving your soup out all night on a low heat source and rolling the dice on whatever happens with that. From a cooking perspective, not a halachic perspective. For those other, we have soup sometimes in our house. We make soup in the crock pot, and then we leave it cooking from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos. We cover the knob of the crock pot, and you have soup on Shabbos day. There are clever ways you can come up with making very delicious hot liquidy foods for Shabbos day that are completely permissible. Okay, so Nun Gimel, Afilu b'Shabbos v'chulei. Delo tema, delo hitiru chachamim ela kishenatal me'erev Shabbos u'machazir be'erev Shabbos samuch lachashecha kamash malan demoter litol l'hachzir afilu b'Shabbos gufei v'afilu kama pa'amim. This is not to say, like there is an opinion out there that interprets the Gemara this way, I believe, that the chachamim did not don't say the following, that the chachamim only permitted kishenatal me'erev Shabbos when you take the food off the fire on Erev Shabbos and return it to the fire on Erev Shabbos. And that their gzeira was, no, you can return to the fire 5 minutes before Shabbos. We call that shahiyah. But maybe you could have said, oh, that was what they also went with chazara. It was like you took it off Erev Shabbos. Can you put it back on? The rabbis should say, oh, yes, it's okay. No. That's not how you should interpret this, the Gemara. Kamash Malan, it's mutter to take it off and to put it back on, even on Shabbos itself. Va'afilu kama pe'amim. You could do this on and off and on and off and on and off. Not a problem at all. This is a good idea, again, if you are having a two-tiered lunch. If this maybe happens more when you have younger children, your children, grandchildren at your table, and they're hungry first. And you want to give them the cholent on Shabbos day. And you're like, wait a minute, how am I going to do this though? Once I pull it off, I can't put it back on. No, yes, you can. You have to pull it off, and you'll have to meet all the conditions we're about to talk about. Just give your children or grandchildren their cholent. Then the adults are still coming home for another hour or two from shul, and then you can put it right back onto the crock pot, onto the element, and it can continue as is on the crock pot. Not a problem at all. Again, so long as you meet the conditions of returning it, of chazara, back onto the heat source. So the first one we talked about was kolzman shehiro tachas, as long as it is boiling. Let's look at Nun Daled now. This Tanai Chazar, this condition of returning it to the fire, is not like the others. To kind of quote the Sesame Street song. Because the other ones, the reason for for the restriction that we're going to see by the other conditions, right? The rabbi said, this is the only way we're going to allow you to return something back to the fire. Again, where you're talking about the fire is on, and we're worried maybe you're gonna play with the fire. But under these conditions that we're gonna meet those conditions in just a second. That's what the rabbi said has to be met, and that's all about chazara. It's the decree of the rabbis, holy. But this, the idea of it has to be boiling or still very hot when you put it back on. The kevan shenistalek meretichaso, if it stops, retichaso literally means to bubble, to boil. If it stops, from that high intense heat, the hainu she'ein hayad saledesbo, it's not hot enough that it could really burn your hand, or that you would move your hand away when you put your hand near something that's very hot. That's what yad saledesbo. Your head could be, could be burnt from it. So yihi eboshuv iser bishul. Now we're talking about a problem of bishul, not a chazar problem. But imagine your cholent or your soup that has cooled down somewhat. And now when I put it back on the fire, many will explain that the principle of ein bishul achar bishul, when it comes to liquids, doesn't hold. That once it's cooled down, and now it's no longer fully. It's not as hot. It's not hot anymore in the sense that it's boiling, bubbling, whatever you want to call it. The returning of that to the fire is tantamount to cooking. So we are, and that's generally that is a very standard way to look at things, that we hold that when it comes to liquids, we do not reheat liquids. So this is what it would basically be. That's why Kolzman Shiotachas is what he says. Now,
But why is that the case? That liquids and solids are different when you come to Ein Bishul, Achar Bishul?
so when it comes to it's actually easier probably to see with a solid, because why there's no cooking, because once it's done, it's done. The problem is with a liquid, more often than not, as you eat, I'll even admit, let's say you have a fully cooked soup, but then you continue, or the cholent, and you continue to cook it, it is actually good for it. And so there's at least a question. It's a question whether that continuation, if let's say it comes off the fire, now you're putting it back on, there's at least a question of whether that action, that fire that's now heating up this pot again, this is an action we call cooking, because there is an enhancement that that ensues from the reheat, from the heat. Some will say no, ein bishul achar bishul, but here the rabbis were strict because it mimics it. But a very standard interpretation is say that principle that's mentioned in the Gemara doesn't apply to liquids. So that's why you're probably familiar with. We don't reheat liquids on Shabbos, but if it's already still hot, go for it.
But you are allowed to reheat solids even if there's an enhancement.
Yes. Well, yes, correct. There is the end of the day, a solid food is in some ways easier to determine that it is cooked or it's not cooked, right? It's sort of reached a certain state, and now it can never go back. Even if it's cold, it's still cooked. And of course, the soup is also cooked, even if you eat it cold, afterwards, it's not like you're going to be in danger of whatever kind of poisoning if you have chicken soup that's cold. It's just may not be delicious, but yeah. So I hear your point. It's a good point, Steve. Right? When it comes to solids, there's no qualifying it. When it comes to liquids, this is how the rabbis interpreted or understood it. Yeah.
And what about a solid that has a liquid sauce, like you have chicken with a wine sauce or something?
So as long as it's not the majority, this is Rav Yosef's psak, as long as it's not the rove. So if you have a little bit of just a thin layer of sauce at the bottom, you might even be able to argue that any time that the sauce, that the liquid at the bottom is there, simply to prevent the burning of the chicken, let's say, right, that's going to be fine. When it's steeped in a sauce, then the reheating of that liquid is not preventing the burning, though it is, but it is primarily there for flavor enhancement purposes. So if there's a thin layer, you're okay. It's really not, it doesn't have to be that the only thing you could have ever reheat on Shabbos, in my humble opinion, is schnitzel, right? It can be also, other types of chicken, but sometimes, by the nature of the whatever it's got, sometimes the chicken itself sort of produces a little bit of liquid and it's there at the bottom. That's fine. It's not the majority of not the rove of the pan. Okay. Where are we? Okay, so calls okay, fine. But as we talk about when we get to the laws of cooking in Shin Yud Ches in a year or two, it's again that he's sort of sending you to the laws of Bishul. And if you go to Shin Yud Ches Sif Daled, which you don't have in front of you, but I'll pull it up. If you look at Sif Daled, right off the bat, he paskins. Yeah, you don't have this in front of you, but this is the interpretation of Rashi and the Rush, quoting Rashi, which is Tafshil Shenizbashal Kol Tzorko. If you have something that's fully cooked, Yesh bo mishum bishul im nitztanin. If it cools down, there is still bishul that is eligible here after the fact. And the Mishnah Berurah over there says, "V'alkein asur min haTorah lahaniach hatav shel hazav Shabbos b'makom cham shayad soledes bo," and therefore it will be even perhaps a Torah violation, according to the Rash's understanding of Rashi of the Gemara. That would be a Torah violation if you put it in a place where this soup, that let's say a soup that reboils on Shabbos day. Now to make it come to a boil in a kli sheni, which we'll get to that fun topic of kli sheni, that is going to be there is room to be lenient there, which is relevant when you talk about the discussion of making tea and you're cooking the leaves there. Some are machmir about this question, about the leaves, the tea leaves, and some are lenient. But there at least you have room to talk about. You have room what to talk about. But anyway, so there is more to talk about this topic. It's not fully done, and the problem is there's this many pages in between this and that. So we'll get there. Just have a little patience. But I'm always happy to answer questions. We have questions about it, but here there is a full treatment here. By the way, the Ramah there adds in v'yesh omen dafka im mistamik v'yafelo. It's only a problem if it's mistamik v'yafelo. That's what I was referring to. If let's say you have a little liquid at the bottom of something, and it's there really to prevent the food from burning, I wouldn't call that yafelo. I would call that venutrolo. It's not really. It's just anyway, so keep that in mind when you're reheating your food.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I know if I'm getting ahead here, but I thought the rule was that as long as you didn't put the pot down, you could return it.
Yes, that's going to be one of that will be the next Tanai Chazar. Excellent.
Okay.
You're anticipating correctly. That's for when you're returning it to the fire. There are two different things going on here. There's returning it to the fire that you just pulled it off or recently pulled it off, and then there's reheating the next day thing. They are kind of on two tracks, and so keep that in mind, right? When we talk about putting it back on the fire, here we're talking about even a liquid, right? In our simon that we're learning right now. So we have these two tracks going here. We'll get to the other track more specifically soon, but okay. Just to finish up that Mishnah Berurah comment, if Tezvav in Shin Ches Bahaga and the Ramah in his comments there, this is a very important point. The Ramah is going to paskin in Shin Ches that you can return something to the fire so long as it hasn't. These are his words. Quote nitztanen legamre. What does that mean? Completely cooled down. So this means that if you pull the cholent off and you're giving your children and your grandchildren first, that was off the fire for 15 minutes. My friends, a cholent for 15 minutes off the fire is still very hot. I would not call that nitztan legamre. And I remember my leader when we talked about this, I believe he said nitztan legamre probably means room temperature. That's when it's completely cooled down. It's now reached room temperature. So long as the food has not reached room temperature, you can 100% return it to the fire. Okay? So if you're pulling something off and you want to be able to put it back on, you have complete license to do so, not a problem at all. If you meet the following conditions, there is a comment of the Ramah that we'll probably not get to today that is going to further push the leniency, or not the leniency, but further open the boundaries of how you reheat food. So we'll get there. There's a lot of material flying around here, but remember that it's tanin legamre. The Ramah paskins, it has to completely cool down in order for you not to be able to put it back on the fire. Okay, that's even with regards to this where it gets confusing. This is also with regards to a solid, but not the way we reheat. The way we reheat food is very different from chazara. It is not called chazara it is a chazara, but it's not prohibited because of how we set up our fire, let's say on a warming tray. Okay, so we're going to get, again, all this will come together. I promise you, we're going to tie it into a nice bow by the time we're done with this. So you have to trust me, which is dangerous. But anyways, back up on top of the Ramah. The Oda B'Yada, the Ramah adds in the second Tanai Chazar, which the Shulchan Aruch does not mention this. He may have subsumed it in the next comment, in the next words. They may have meant sort of the same thing. The Oda B'Yado means it still has to be in your hand. When you want to return something back to the fire, you have to still be holding onto it. So let's use our cholent again. We take the cholent off out of the heating element. We know we want to serve it to our children and grandchildren. Someone literally has to keep their hand on the side of the pot the whole time. Yes, it's ridiculous, but it is what it is. I've done this. It's a little silly. You make it happen, and we're off to the races, and you can put it back on. Why is this the case? So actually, let's read one more phrase in the Shulchan Aruch. And you're not to place it on the ground. Okay, once you place it on the ground, you cannot then place it back on the fire. What's going on here? What is the ground? First of all, why are you putting food on the floor? Again, you have to remember, they didn't have the kind of counter space that we had today. Their floor wasn't made of the materials it's made of today. It was dirt. Most people, unless you were super wealthy, probably had dirt floors. And okay, so you put it on the dirt floor. It was a place that probably was pretty stable, and it was a place to put something while you were doing other things. Okay, so what's going on here? Why are these two conditions important for returning something to the fire? Nunhe in the Mishnah Berurah, Oda B'Yada, Rotzelomar, Shalo Heisir Hakadera Meyado Me'es Tilasa Menakir Acha Sheachazirana. Literally, it says here you're not supposed to remove the pot from your hand from the time that you take it off the fire, from the kira, from the oven, on the top of the oven of the kira, until the time that you return it back to the fire. Uleapuke im hinicha al gabe mita usafsal v'chadom laze ben time have kemo shehinicha al gabe karka ben time v'ze aser lekule alma. The batla la hashihia harishona. So he says this excludes if you place it on a mita. It literally means a bed. Again, different world. This is from the language of the Gemara. Mita, v'safsal, these are language from the Gemara of bed and bench. You might say today, we would say counter. They were not zocha always to have a counter. And things that are like this main time. So this excludes if you place it down on one of these things, a bed or a bench, it's like putting it on the ground in between. And that for sure is, and that is not allowed according to everybody. Why is this not allowed when you put it down on the ground? The batla Allah hashihiyah harishona, because it is canceling out the shahiyah that brought us to this point. The food was on the fire from when Shabbos began. It's continuing. If I remove it and put it on the ground, it is showing that now that heating up is over. When you put it on the ground, that is a more permanent move. Like I am changing where this pot is in the halach, certainly in the halachic sphere. We see the shahiyah as being over now, and once the shahiyah is over, now you're in the realm of chazara. So it's really chazara. So again, not to make things too confusing here, but permissible chazara really stems from shahiyah. If it's really a continuation of the shahiyah from before Shabbos, I just had a little temporary break, no problem. But if I have created a hefsek, a complete break, and now I'm going to return it back to the fire, that is no longer considered the shahiyah that it was, and now it's chazara. There's a new rule of returning it to the fire on Shabbos, and because of some fears of playing with the fire, stoking the coals, moving things around under the oven, the rabbis did not want you to return things to the fire unless it really was a continuation of what you had already started. Hopefully that helps also, just in terms of the rabbis view this as a continuation, like a process that's just continuing, had a little blip on the radar, but then you return it back to what it was. It's not a new thing. When you put it on the ground, they said that's over. It's done.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
I hate interrupting you.
No, please.
Where the food must be very, very hot when you're doing this. That was the first condition, right?
Well, again,
So-
the Ramah later qualifies and says as long as it hasn't completely cooled down to room temperature.
Okay.
So you have that, you have a window of time.
Okay.
so long as
because
you continue to hold on to it.
seems very difficult to hold on to that pot.
Yes.
If it's very, very hot.
Yeah.
So the question is, what if you have like a trivet and you put it on the trivet, which isn't really the ground, but analogous,
Right.
but you're still holding on to the side of the pot? What are you doing? Are you-
So it's a good. We're gonna actually. This is going to come up in just a moment.
Oh.
I don't know. It's actually excellent. This is exactly what I was gonna. I'm trying to remember where this comes up. It was here in the. This comes up. Hold on. Well, let's keep reading.
Okay.
I remember preparing when I was preparing. It comes up.
Okay.
Maybe it's about to come up even in this
I don't need
mission.
to know that today.
No. It's an excellent question about, what if you want to put it down on a trivet because it's super hot? Because it seems very impractical to say, okay, I'll hold it. Now, how am I going to get the food out? So right now, it seems like a two-person job. So can we change it to one-person job? Let's see. So he says here, when you then return it back to the kira, it is like returning it. It is like placing it there, like, oh, this is a new moment, and that is not going to be allowed. You can return it to the fire, right, as a continuation of the shahiyah that was, but to do a new, it's not. They wouldn't be returning it to the fire; it would be putting it on anew, and that the rabbis did not allow. Afshakvar nisbashla cold sorka, even if it's fully cooked. There's nothing to worry about in terms of bishul. The bishul is, forget the bishul, still not allowed. Mikol makom kaven shema amida b'makom shederech levashal sham tamid. And here is one of the most crucial lines we're going to read. Nevertheless, since it is placed in a place where it is normally cooked, people cook in that spot. Derech levashal sham tamid. You're always cooking there. Sorry, this is a very frustrating line. It gives the appearance of cooking. It looks like I'm cooking because this food was not on the fire beforehand. Now I removed it. It's anew. I'm placing it anew, and therefore, when I place new food on the fire on Shabbos in a place where people normally cook, that is a problem. The rabbis made a decree that is not allowed because it's nireh kemevashal lechatchila. It looks like you're cooking on Shabbos. This is where the problem is going to come in. This will be explicitly mentioned in this moment. Placing food back into an oven, even though you're not cooking it. It's cooked already, but it's nireh kemevashal, and it's like, wait. Someone just put food into the oven, and that's a place where we cook. And they say, well, how do you get away with it in other places? Well, if you put it into, let's say, a warming drawer, nobody cooks in a warming drawer. Nobody. Maybe there's a yachid here, out there in the world who cooks in a warming drawer. I don't think you can actually cook something in a warming drawer, probably.
No, and the manual says specifically in capital
You
letters.
can't, right? Don't cook, right? The manual says don't cook in the. It doesn't work. It won't get hot enough, and then you have. So when I heat up my food, I don't have a warming drawer. But if you have a warming drawer, go to town. You're good. If you have, I use a warming tray. Right, and there's an adjustable knob on that. I cover it. Nobody cooks on a warming tray. Even if the warming tray can get very hot, that in theory it could cook, it's not something that people do. And therefore, this gets around the whole problem altogether. Because once I'm not dealing with a place or space that people normally cook, it's a different ballgame. And then these things all fall away. Now you're like, hopefully there's a window. I'm just giving you a window. We'll talk about this much more in the weeks ahead. That's a window into why then suddenly I can take the food right out of the refrigerator, which, by the way, some poskim are not comfortable with it, and we'll talk about that. But you're okay with that. That's okay. Take it out of the refrigerator and you put it on in the warming drawer. Why is it okay? Because it's not nireh kemevashal. It doesn't look like it, and so long as you set up the heating element so that it's goru fakatum, That's the other thing that's sort of still floating in the background. You're good to go. You're good to go. Okay. Sorry. I took a little detour on that, but that was a very important line to just fully understand, appreciate why we do what we do, and that's okay, and why it's different than one of the things that we're hearing right now. This is when you're important also to know, because it's relevant again to the cholent you have on Shabbos day, relevant to food on Friday night when you want to put it back on the fire and make sure it stays warm. Okay. Back to the T'nai Chazara. Although I wanted to deal with actually Hinda's question, which was what happens if you put it on a trivet on something. Talked about it here. I'm just it's slipping my eyes as to where on the page this is discussed. All right, I don't know. Hold on. Let's keep going. I feel like I remember seeing it. Oh, it's the next comment in the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, we'll get there in a second. Okay. So the Ramah adds in here, but daito lahachazira. Next condition for chazar here we had boiling. Again, the Ramah pulls that back to all the way, so long as it didn't completely cool down. Second condition has to be in your hand. Third condition doesn't touch the ground. Right? You not touch the ground. You don't place it. Hinicha, an important word here. Hinicha, to place it on the ground. Vidato lahachzira. Fourth, you have to have it in mind. You have to have kavana that you want to put it back. Now, no one else can know that except for you and your brain. So no one can start questioning you on this one. You have to be honest. It's the honor system here. That you had in mind that you want to put it back. Nunvav in the Mishnah Berurah. Vidato lahachzira. Hatam gam kein kanis kalel. The reason is, as we mentioned before, shali dezeh lo batla adayin shehiyah harishona. The shehiyah that was didn't stop. It doesn't cancel it out. Shehiyah osa al hakira iba odyom that you put there right before Shabbos. You put it on the fire. Keven shaya dato lahachzir. Since you have in mind now when you take it off to put it back, adshol titztanin. So long as it didn't cool down. See, already the Mishnah Berurah is not talking about that's boiling. It's just as long as it didn't cool down. Then it's okay. If at the beginning when you pull it off, you didn't have in mind, I'm just taking it off, I'm done, I'm taking the cholent off. And then and then you're like, oh, actually I want to put it back. But your kavana was when you took it off that I was not going to put it back. So also then it would be prohibited. Again, who's going to police you on this one? You have to police yourself. This is there's nothing, this is all on you. It is not allowed, even if you didn't put it down on the ground, made time in between. It's like putting it there lechatchila b'Shabbos. It's like a new putting on the fire on Shabbos, and we're not allowed to do it. The Be'er Halacha quotes that there are many Rishonim. Who shemekilin be'odan biyado. There are many who are leaning as long as it's in your hand. Afilu ein dato lachzor. Even if you didn't have it in mind to return it, but you had your hand on it the whole time, almost like saying you really were thinking it, even if you weren't thinking it, because you were holding on to it. So some are lenient for that. Some are lenient about, I had it in mind to return it, but I removed my hand for a moment from it, which, by the way, by definition means you put it down somewhere. If you're not holding it, it has to be down somewhere. Laws of gravity would teach us that. Look, really, you should try to keep your hand on it. Try to hold somebody, hold it, and you have to have it in mind. But if you, let's say you had it in mind and you put it down for a second, and you weren't thinking, it's not ideal, but you have upon whom to rely that this is okay, because really at the end of the day, you had it in mind. You didn't want to, you didn't want this shehiyah to end. So you have this, again, hold it in your back pocket. You should try to make sure not to rely on that. Chazara, when I've done it before, is a two-person job. It's not fun, but if you want to scoop out some cholent ahead of time, for kids or grandkids, that's what you really should do. if you're really, really, really in a pinch and you have no one else there and you have really hungry kids or whatever, so if you put it down, keep your hand on it, use one hand to take it off and do the scooping and placing, and then put it back. So you have here at least upon whom to rely if you find yourself in such a situation.
Is that your response to Hinda's question about the trivet?
Yes, that you really shouldn't. Ideally, to cover yourself on all bases here, Rishonim wise, you should try to make it a two-person job. Someone should hold it, other person should scoop. Because realistically, unless it's something that's very small where you can hold it with one hand and the oven mitt, it's not really realistic that one person does it. Again, you have here some lenient opinions upon what to rely if you're really in a pinch. That's why I'm saying if you're in a pinch and you're the only one there who can do this, and there are people who are relying on this, kids are very hungry, your grandkids are very hungry, some whatever. You'll remember we had this kula here, okay? And you need it. It's a real need. Do it the other way. Okay. What time is it? 8:22. Okay, so I'm just going to read one last line in the Mishnah in the Shulchan Aruch, and then we will even read the Mishnah Berurah next time. So, but I just want to throw this out there again. The fourth line here of the Mishnah Berurah mind, the Mishnah V'dafka of the Shulchan Aruch, excuse me, V'dafka al gaba. When is it okay to return it to the fire? When it's on top of the kira. We're talking about a kira here. When it's on top of the kira, aval letocha, but inside the kira, it's a no-no, asur. That's not allowed. Let's read the Mishnah. We're fine. Nun zayin nun ches. We'll review this next week. V'dafka al gaba. Why is it? It's a problem on top. It's okay on top if you return. All the conditions are met, and you could return on top of the kira. Hainu al ovi dafnoter milamala. You're putting it on the thickness of the walls up above. Like just you imagine you're putting it on top of the kira, on top of the hole, but the pot is sitting on top of it. Oh, shesam kisui al chalala, or let's say you put a covering on top of the opening, and you put the pot on top of the covering because the pot will otherwise fall through. So you put you're putting almost like a trivet on top of the hole, so it doesn't fall in, and then okay, good, no problem. That's on top of the kira. Gam came al gaba have. Velo mikre tocha. Okay, I try to picture this. You have the hole on top. You ever have a pot? I don't see that. I don't see you'll find this so often with a pot. I can think about this with other things we have in our kitchen. But the pot is wide on top and narrow at the bottom. Almost imagine like a cone. Okay, and if you place it into the hole, at some point, some of it will go down in. And if you take a look on the screen here, Steve Keller is showing you a picture from his Mishnah Berurah. If you can see that there a moment ago. Steve's trying to get it on the screen there. Okay, he's going to get it. But bottom line is you have here, imagine you're placing it down in. You see it here? Well, that's right. I'm even imagining it. Here, take a look here. See, there's the picture. Uh-huh. Right? But I'm even imagining it like it's sitting. That's what he's saying here. Some of the top of the pot kind of juts out. So it rests on the top, on the rim, the top of the pot, the wider part is resting, and the bottom part is lowered into the oven, into the avir, into the atmosphere of the kira itself. Even that is okay, even though it's actually kind of sticking down into it. But since it's really resting on top in some ways, he says that you can be lenient in that situation. It's not called inside elikashio sheves hakter al karkois akira unless the pot is sitting on the ground of the kira, basically. Okay, then it's considered inside the kira. If it's sort of resting into the kira, that's still okay. Last comment, then I gotta go. Aval letocha aser, putting it into the kira is not allowed. Why not? As I mentioned before, the kaven shumami letocha. You're placing it inside. The way people normally cook is inside an oven. I grant you're not cooking right now. I understand. The rabbis made a decree that it looks like cooking. And since it looks like an act of cooking, even though it is not an act of cooking, and you'll say, oh, but I'll tell all my friends who are there for Shabbos, I'm not cooking, it's fully cooked. The rabbis made a decree. It's a law that's sort of on the books. Doesn't matter whether or not you tell somebody or not tell somebody. This was the decree. I'm not sure about how this works, but if you have a kira that doesn't have an inside and there's no gap, there's no halal, there's no inner chamber to put anything in. It's just a kira with a top. Okay. So imagine it's like very little kira, right? So it's nothing you could put inside. It's like very flat, but tochan v'gaban echad. The inside and the outside are all one. Then you can put it on top. It's not considered toch, even though you have a miniature, essentially kira here, where it's just like there's no inside. There's only a top here. If there's a fire there, he says, take a look at Shinyan Chesif Tezvav about how you deal with the fire. If there's actually a fire in the kira, we'll talk about that more next week. I'll make some comments about what he's talking about there. We'll pause here. You've already gotten a lot actually of some of the basic rules at play here of how we do Chazara. Now we're going to get quite a speech from the Ramah about next week. We'll see a long comment from lots of different comments from the Ramah. And many implications. You see at least on my page, the Mishnah Berurah here is 2 columns on the next page. So Mishnah Berurah is going to have a lot to say about all these various things we're going to talk about. Still lots to go. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sean.